Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Tree Actions, the Human Forestry Podcast. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Tony Tresselt, joining us from Pennsylvania. I'm in Alberta, Canada, and joining us all the way from sunny California, I believe the northern parts of the state, is old friend and colleague Robert Phillips, better known as Bob. How's it going, Bob?
Doing well out here. Thanks. Appreciate the invite.
You're where exactly are you right now? Where are you hanging out?
Lovely Sonoma Valley.
The Sonoma Valley.
It's out of Santa Rosa.
Right. That's not really north at all, is it?
That's north of San Francisco.
Yeah. It is beautiful. And yeah, lots of wine country.
Wine country, in the heart of wine country.
Wow. Well, welcome to the show, Bob. I'm looking forward to our conversation. We always kind of start the show off by asking one question, and it kind of flows from there. And that question is, if you could share with us the very first time you recall feeling a connection to trees.
Well, as early as I can remember, so 5, 6, 7, 8 years old. I was born in a tree business, so it's a family. So, you start off with whatever you can do in the job. And then as you age, you take on the next responsibility. So if it's sweeping the shop and washing the trucks, and then the next job is, hauling brush and riding in the truck. And then you get to drive the trucks. Wow. And we had some pretty old trucks. A lot of the trucks came from World War II. So there were some pretty old, heavy rigs. And so you learn to drive with, no synchro. So then, as the summers roll on and you get out of school, you start to working your way up the ladder, one project after another, and go through the seasons. There's always a spraying season and the fertilizing season, and then there's the getting into the actual climbing aspect of it. And that didn't take long. I was, 16, 17 when I got started climbing.
Wow.
So, but I was climbing long before that, just not getting paid for it.
Right. Do you remember your first harness that you kind of worked in and your first, the knot, the hitch that you used and your setup?
Oh, absolutely. The first saddle was a rope saddle with some pads, and the second one was a leather saddle with just strictly leather. It didn't take long, though, till I met Don Blair, and I used the Bridan saddle developed by Ed Hobbs. And I never got out of that, and I still wear it today. I probably have 6 of them on the rack because I've outgrown them. But, of course, the first knot was a taut line hitch, and it was just 3 wraps, and then it was 4 wraps, and then thank God the 90s came along, and it was the Blake hitch.
Right.
Felt a little more secure. But certainly there were, the learning experiences of all the hitches.
Right.
The slippage.
We've had Don on the show, and when and how did your introduction occur with Don? How did your relationship develop and begin?
He came to our yard to sell the Hobbs lowering device and got out of the trunk of his car. But I had known Don prior to that because I had known his father, Miller, from having attended meetings with my parents. And then as kids, Don and I grew up from 1960 on. We were at the 1962 International Conference, and that's how we met as kids. But it was years later that he got into the equipment business. That's when we came driving in the driveway and opened up his trunk and says, "Look what I got in here." So I bought one of the first lowering devices that he had for sale at, $320. And I still have it. Don't use it, but I still have it.
And I think you also developed and maintained a relationship with the person that still produces those devices.
Absolutely. Talked to him last week.
Yeah,
Ken Johnson.
Ken Johnson. We haven't had Ken on the show. He's hard to track down, but that device. How much has the Hobbs the evolution of the Hobbs, has it changed much since the one you bought for $320, and or is it fundamentally sound?
It has changed tremendously, safety wise. If you had a couple hours, I could tell you some incidences where there were very scary moments, lowering tops out of trees, and ropes get caught underneath the drum and outside the drum, and loops got skipped off. And if you didn't put yourself in the right position, the wraps would come off, and the piece would come down a lot quicker than you would want. But thanks to Ken Johnson and a lot of his innovations, a lot of that has been eliminated, and we haven't had any problems with it yet. So it's a good thing he came along.
Right. So I guess you must have known Ed Hobbs himself as well then.
I met Ed Hobbs, yes, absolutely.
I know he recently passed away, and Don lamented that we weren't able to get him on the show. He thought he would have been a great addition, and we would have loved to have had him on the show. But unfortunately, he's passed on. But he was really, if I'm not mistaken, not only the first lowering device really built for tree work, but also some of the first blocks ever built specifically for tree work, I believe, was kind of his invention, wasn't it?
Hobbs block, yep, absolutely. And I have an array of those as well. But as I mentioned, I wore a Bright Ann saddle, and the Bright Ann saddle was also designed and made by Ed Hobbs, and it was named after his two sons, Brian and Dan. That's where Bright Ann came from. So Ed was an innovator in many aspects.
Yes.
He built the saddle because he was so upset.
So was he near you, or what part of California was he from?
Well, down the peninsula on the other side of San Francisco in the Moraga area. It's a whole nother. From here, it's about 90 miles. So,
okay.
But yeah, it was, a chance meeting. We met at a California Arborist Association meeting. And that's how I made my connections and going to meetings.
Yeah. I think, you've been very involved with, with associations and the developing, I guess, kind of the group conscience of arborists that are willing to be part of something, right? You've been involved with that for many years.
Well, it was ingrained in me. So, being as my grandfather was one of the founders of the West Coast chapter, Western chapter.
Right.
And he's attended the ISA annual meetings since the onset. So it was just a part of the blood. Thank God my father carried on with it, and I followed in the footsteps.
Well, so you're not just second generation, you're third.
Correct. Yeah.
Wow. And I know that you have quite a collection. You may be one of the guests that we might have to have on again in a video capacity, because I would say that you probably are the curator of some of the most extensive collection of arborist artifacts, not only from equipment, but to tree parts that perhaps exists anywhere.
Well, in this area for certain, it's funny. And I don't think the story is relevant, but when somebody broke in and stole some equipment, I was like, well, thank God, because that stuff was so old you couldn't use it again. But, we still have a couple of Bosom saddles that hang on the wall, and some of the old, Bartlett loppers and saws and tools of that nature. But yeah, there a lot of stuff just is still lying around. I try to stay up to date with what's available, and the old stuff just kind of gets set on the shelf and doesn't get used anymore, and the new stuff is the hot stuff. So,
I'm curious what your thoughts would be on the progression of arboriculture, particularly in the last couple of decades, where we've seen such, incredible change, compared to, I remember when New England came out with Safety Blue with the orange trace, the orange and white, and it was like, wow, a rope with color. That was like a big deal. And that was like early 90s. And, you compare that, and that's even predates the Blakes, and then you look at the hitches and now single rope or stationary rope. How important is it, Bob, do you think? And it's one of the reasons we started the show, is to try to keep a connection or to make people aware of some of the history, and to just like, for example, learning for me today about Brydan and the origin of that name. But how important is that? And is there a way that we can communicate that to people, that there is an importance to remember our legacy or our past?
Well, I think it's important not to ever forget it. And I do whatever I can whenever I'm given the opportunity to provide that information to the new incoming people. And it's always interesting. It's kind of 50-50. Some people just exit the room after a talk, and other people just line up to want to hear more. And I always make sure I have a handout to give them of keeping them in touch with the past. And, I like to get them on the track of learning new things, but not to forget where we've come from.
So where did you get that from, Bob? How is that instilled in you, do you think?
Oh, that probably came through just the fact that my grandfather took the time to take photographs of all the old equipment and methods, and, finding a drawer full as a child and looking through it and not really understanding it. And then as I developed more into the industry, I realized the value of the history. And I also am a history buff. So, it was one thing to have it in the drawer. It's another to take the pictures of it, put it in a book, put it in a format, put it on the internet, and let people, share amongst themselves. I know that one of the best times I've ever had was in New Jersey with the Chisholm family, and giving a talk on the history of arboriculture, and just a huge standing ovation, because they were just fascinated with everything that I had brought to the table. Because it was, some pretty fascinating equipment, some interesting innovations, and I do what I can, like I said, with what I've been given. So it wasn't like I went out and researched it. It was just opening up a drawer and, oh my goodness, look at all these photographs. So,
wow,
it was a treasure.
Well, it makes me think of the concept that we talk about in this podcast of the human forest. And, a forest is made up of many parts and different stages of development within the species that comprise it, where you have, even from nurse logs laying on the forest floor to young saplings benefiting from that. I think that, to me, is an example of the importance of connecting with the heritage of any industry or anything you're a part of. And the history is part of that heritage. And it's more than just informational. I think it's fundamental to, I don't know, just if you're really part of something, you need that connection or that grounding to fulfill, I don't know, your purpose within whatever it is you're doing in the current day. It's something's missing without that, I think. And it feels like today's day and age is so much innovation, and with the the information that's so easily available, and even in the education that someone can be, they get a lot of followers on a social media platform, and they're suddenly vaulted into some sort of status of reverence, or and I'm not saying that it isn't always warranted, but I don't know. I don't know if I understand where you can relate to what I'm talking about. I'm rambling a bit here. If you can help me out.
You can tell by my T-shirt that I wear it proudly. And, the back of the shirt is just exact same thing. More pictures of trees that got off in the wrong, got started off wrong. And they won't have much of a legacy. And they'll probably be removed before they get to 15 years old because of situations of being planted incorrectly, methods that were tried that failed. And I do, thank God for the phone, but I take pictures wherever I walk, and downtown, wherever it is. And I see all this and I'm like, wow, what a great deal of money has been invested, but it has no future. And it's kind of a shame that, there's so many programs for tree planting, but honestly, I don't think the people that are planting the trees have any real understanding of what they're doing, from the selection of the species, let alone the height that they plant it at, or how they, direct the roots or put the root barriers in. And it's interesting, again, an attempt to be a part of history that they're failing on several fronts. So, like I said, I never run out of material, because it seems like everywhere I go and every avenue I walk on, I see nothing but failed attempts at trying to integrate trees into the landscape. So I could take this shirt off, put on another one, and show you the whole other aspect of.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It makes me think of your connection with Shigo. It's what you're talking about now. I hear echoes of Shigo was lamenting of the same thing. We'd love to have had Shigo on the show, but you were very close with Alex, like some of us were. And spent a lot of time with him, and he would lament similar things, very similar things about
Yes.
poor trees not getting the chance they deserve, so to speak, or the ignorance of tree biology still is the major problems of trees worldwide, is one of his most common quotes.
It's hard to follow in the footsteps, but he did a great job of planting the seeds of understanding of how things are and how things can be and how we can make a change. So some of us make that choice and some of us just ignore it and walk on. But I would, I feel like I let him down if I didn't try to make a change for the better.
I think that it's something for me that's been coming up in my own life is this concept of, I guess I could say responsibility and or discipline, and that what we do truly does impact, our not only ourselves but those around us, and whether it be our industry or just humanity in general or the universe in general, there is we have a lot more influence and power within our own right than we think. And if you lose sight of that or think you don't, it can cause a real spiral of apathy or something like that. And I wonder how much of that plays into all this, and how much is it, people need to be reminded that it does matter. I think of the starfish story where the guy's walking on the beach throwing starfish back in that are stranded on the sand, and there's thousands of starfish as far as you can see. And someone asks him what he's doing. He said, well, I'm trying to save some starfish. And they're like, you're never going to save, hardly making a difference. And he picks one up and throws it in the water and said, it made a difference to that one. What do it's interesting you mentioned that, like what obligation is there, or what can we do to inspire that for people? Not only, like, let's just, even within the industry of arboriculture.
Unless you get into the politics of city government, you're going to just find yourself more and more frustrated. And even then, I want to say you're being dictated to as to what tree species you're going to put in where. Getting in on the plans, and then the organization of the planting and the direction. All of that is, I can't say it's out of our hands, but unless you get connected and get involved with that whole process, you're just going to follow along and continue to keep throwing the starfish back into the ocean. Again, I mean, it doesn't take long for me to get lost in the frustration of going down the street and seeing, oh my God, here we go again. Who the heck would plant this? And why would you put this tree grade on? And the roots are showing, like it wasn't even put in the ground. All they want to do is get a job done and a quota filled, and they move on. And there's no accountability. So who am I as an individual come along and critique what was been done, unless I want to get on my hands and knees and redo it, pretty much pull out the plant that was put in and replant it. But most of these trees that are put in these small spaces are not given the number one thing that they need in that space.
Right. Well, and I think also if you do take the time to look at the tree itself and the roots, when we teach tree planting courses every now and then, we don't teach it as much as I think we should. We don't get asked to teach it a lot. But when we do, one of the things we always do is exhume trees that have died. With the last time I did the class, the municipality had several trees that could be exhumed that were 2 or 3 years old and completely dead. And then we just, do an autopsy of the root system and everything else. And even take new plants that they're intending to plant and sacrifice some for the sake of education. And it's astonishing. What you find below ground that is hidden in the burlap and the wire or the pot or whatever. It just blows my mind. It's I don't know if you find that as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we have a local tree company or a growing ground that field grows trees and doesn't put them in containers except to transport them. And there's 100% success in the planting. And it's mostly oak trees. It's called specialty oaks. And
Wow.
a lot of it has to do with, the preparation of the plant prior. And they do cull plants if if they realize that they can't transplant them, they just go, this is one's been in the ground too long and we can't do anything with it. We need to make room for newer plants to come in. But they have had a very high success, and they only work with 4 or 5 species of oak trees, and it's just been a wonderful outfit to work with. But again, as Alex said, it's either wets or stews. It's water, element, temperature, and space, or space, temperature, elements, and water. However you want to spell it, the number one thing is space, and most trees are not given the space they need. In the inner urban interface, it's cram them in there, meet the quota. Every plant has to have 10 trees, and they have to be put somewhere. And unfortunately, again, he always reminded me trees should be planted in clusters, not just
Right.
individual, street tree plantings. And I understand the benefits of shade. I get that. But I also understand the infrastructure of roots and how damaging they can be. Just about anything that's named concrete. Foundations, gutters, drains. It just is, it's tormenting. So,
Well, it's the forest. It's the forest concept or the forest model, right? That's the whole concept of groups. That they're, and Shigo would always talk about trees are not singles. They came in groups called forests. They're communities, um, and not just singular species,
yeah.
but the whole, and not just the forest, but that's something else. Is you look at a forest, it isn't just trees. I mean, you've got fungi, you've got understory plants, you've got wildlife, you've got decay organisms, you've got, it's just the cycle that's there from top to bottom. The leaves falling and then decomposing and then layering. We all of that. You take one element of those away, and you're going to affect its efficacy or the ability for it to function. And you look at an urban environment. Well, if you plant a tree singularly in a box surrounded by concrete, like you've basically taken almost all of it away.
Especially when you rake all the leaves up and take away the composting material. Monocultured species, singular plantings. It's everything that a forest is not.
Yeah.
Which is unfortunate.
I guess that's why we call it the urban forest, eh?
Took the words out of my mouth. I mean, they got 10 strikes ahead against them most of the time. And that's why the average age for a lot of trees is 15 years. They just cycle out. They take up their space and they're removed. So
built-in obsolescence in a commodity, like it certainly functions well in I don't know if it's a capitalistic model or what you would call it, but it definitely provides revenue and cyclical sustenance of sorts.
It's a quota, and it's being filled, unfortunately.
I agree, and you're absolutely right. I think Jack Phillips, who I met through Shigo, he's been on the show. I know there's no relation. You guys share the same last name, but he would talk about you have to change the specs. Changing what, like you were talking about, within the government realm or wherever that's one aspect of it, but how the trees are selected, how they're planted, where they're planted, like that's where you have to affect the change. It made me think when you reference the starfish again, it makes you got to get the starfish not to get washed up on shore. That's far more effective than throwing them back in.
Well, that has to do with, like you said, the planning department.
Right.
All about trying to get people in houses, but at the same time, it'd be nice if they took some of the plots and put them into developing miniature forest.
Yeah.
Not just parks with grass, that need to be mowed with pathways, but actual, designing with, like you said, different level of trees, different species. No, it's not something you see, but hopefully, moving forward in the future, though, because, people get a piece of property and they create their own forest.
Yep.
Some people do.
They do.
Most people, they have knee-high plants, they have waist-high plants, and, when they get a little taller, then it's a little more difficult for them to manage. But most of them put in fruit trees, because they want something, and they're not really looking at the shade because they don't want to get up and rake the leaves out of the gutter, and they're more of a nuisance in a lot of places because they're trying to put the wrong tree in the wrong spot.
Yeah.
I want a fast-growing tree. Great. Yeah, that's wonderful. You put a eucalyptus next to your house. That's a good choice. Oh, redwoods are so wonderful. There's hardly any cleanup. Yeah. Have you seen what the roots do to foundations? And so I can think of more reasons why not to plant than to plant, especially if you're talking about your house.
Right.
Unfortunately,
yeah.
Just plant them away from the home would help because they would survive a lot longer.
Yeah.
Yesterday, Sunday, I'm out working, just looking at people's properties, and they're saying, well, how far should I stay away from my tree? Well, how far can you stay away? Because what happens, unfortunately, is we call it the shrink wrap fencing. But you put a fence around the tree and the contractor suddenly moves it closer to the tree, till all of a sudden everything is just leaning on the tree. And all the roots are ripped up and the foundation is, changed and the designs change. And now, unfortunately, the tree is compromised.
Yeah.
And they said, well, how much longer do you think we're going to get out of this tree? To the point where it's like, well, maybe we should just cut the tree down. Well, might have thought of doing that before we even put into these plans. Or the one yesterday was, we want to put a driveway around the tree. It's like, wonderful. I don't think that's, what the tree wants. Maybe you should ask what the tree wants, but most of the time that's not of a concern. It's more about getting their house built. So,
yeah,
we, do what we can.
Yes. So, how do you, how is it that people like yourself and those of us that have, chosen it as a profession and a career for decades, how do we still maintain our sanity through all this? That, because there is a lot of frustrating things you see. And yet, I was quite convinced early on that we would see, the day when everyone would understand that how to plant trees or prune trees and not top trees. And sometimes I wonder if it's ever going to change. I think there's been improvement, but what do you think in the, you've got 3 generations to look at the progression of tree care. Where would you say things are at from a public perception, general perspective on trees and how to care for them? Where is it at these days?
Yeah, it's almost fighting an individual battle, one client at a time.
Interesting.
At least for me. And I don't go out as far as I used to, and I don't delve into the politics of trees as much as I could. But many of the examples of which we see before us each and every day are provided by the work that's done to the trees under the utility power lines. And unfortunately, the compromise in which we see is more about the gain of the clearance for a length of time. But what unfortunately happens is the tree is sacrificed and moved on to the next contractor. And in our case, we did line clearance work. We had 8 continuous 5-year contracts. But now you're lucky you get maybe a year and a half. And then trees have to be inspected again, and they change the contractor. They bring somebody else in. And unfortunately, the trees, again, continue to get sacrificed. And so many of the decisions that are made for the trees are not made by the homeowner. They're being forced upon them by the utility contracts. That's saying, we need this, and we don't care about that. And back when we did the work, we would try to take care of the whole tree. But as time's gone on, they've found out that that's not probably as profitable to the utility company, having to work more on the tree and less on the clearance. So now it's just carve out what you need, leave the carcass behind. And, as a practicing arborist who doesn't have a utility line clearance certification, you can't even get into the trees,
right,
to do the work. and they've already taken the top out of the tree, so you can't tie into anything. So if you don't have a lift, you're already, in a bad situation. So there's a lot of that going on here. We have a lot of tall trees, and there's a lot of sacrifice that goes into this. And as you go down the road and you see all these trees lying on the ground, you're like, well, why is the whole tree taken down? Because they don't want to have to come back and do the trimming again. And unfortunately, I drive by this all the time. And if you're a firewood collector, it might work out just great. But if, you're into the aesthetics and you're into the benefits of the trees, then they're not being considered. So again, Alex did a great job of giving us the information, the tools to which we need to get into the hands of the people and to make the decisions. It's just a question of getting that material into those hands.
Right.
And hopefully that information will be absorbed and they can make a better decision. Even with just private clients, I've had the client yesterday said, well, I'd love to be here to see what you do. I want to see you do the work. I want to say, not because you want to do the work, you just want to make sure you're getting your money's worth, or we're really working as hard as we say we do. But the whole idea is, are you really going to learn how to prune your fruit tree? Because, one client, the next door neighbor, I go out and I do what I think is an admirable job of aesthetically pruning the tree for the species. And then I turn my back and they have another crew come in and they do a mutilation of another tree. And it's shaped nicely, but all the cuts are in the wrong places. And the formation of the new growth is going to be sporadic at best. And then I get the question of, well, can you make it look better? Like, you just had the tree destroyed and now you want me to make it look better because you've seen what I've done and you've seen what they've done, and you make the comparison and go, well, there is no comparison. I go, yes, absolutely. That's the point. Next year, maybe you'll let me do all the trees if you really enjoy it. But they're thinking they're saving money. And I'm like, oh, great. So if this is, let me just say that I'll do the work for free. You make the comparison.
Right.
And sometimes that's what has to be done. It kills my wife because she often says you give away far more than you get paid for. But it's a point, and I'm trying to prove, there is an art to this. There is a science to this. And that's what we try to apply, both. And unfortunately, some people don't see that.
Yeah, I agree. I always, from when I first started getting involved in education, it was when I had the opportunity to influence, people getting into the industry, I would remind them or try to help understand that you're not just caring for the tree, but you're also caring for your customer. And it's finding that blend. That's one of the real art and sciences of arboriculture, because we are that liaison. You think of the Lorax analogy, but and it is in the urban environment. It is part of the community that it's a part of, is of the urban forest. So, trees, for example, that are put in too tight of a location where, or there is a utility, or they are blocking a stop sign or something that, that is important. There's ways to make it fit or to do the best you can, with the bad situation, and balancing that out, and partly educating your customer to care enough to do that is part of arboriculture, I think. And sometimes, I guess I feel I'm more like you, where if it wasn't for my wife and being involved in my business, I would have gone broke doing a lot of work. And I've been very busy and I would have pleased a lot of customers and been well liked, but I would not have made a lot of money because I would do that as well. I'll just, knowing that they're going to get someone to damage the tree, yeah. Let me do it for nothing and see what you think. And if you can tolerate it. And usually that's enough, because unfortunately what that exposes is really, it's about the money. And I think that, getting back to this connection that we have with things, I don't know how many people really understand the value that their tree has as part of not only the community, but energetically, like that it's a living thing it's older than you are when you bought your house, and it's going to be there long after you're gone if it's cared for right. Like, what a concept. Right. Like, and it's alive, I don't know if I want to go so far as say they're sentient, but I think there's a lot more energetically going on than people realize. I think some people very much realize it, they get called the tree huggers and, the granolas and whatever, but they actually feel a sense of stewardship for these living entities that are on their property, and it's almost ridiculous to think that we own it. It's kind of like owning air, or owning spirituality. To me, it gets a little bit like that. I know I'm exposing myself here, but I think you probably would agree.
No, 100%. Yeah, we're just the stewards, like you say, they're curators for periods of time. And
right.
You're right. There are those clients that appreciate that, and there's others that just, that's not their concern. They're just moving on. They're in a position in life where they can make a change, and it's their choice. They make the choice not to. And I get that, but that's a passion that you and I share.
Correct.
So, and we do the best we can with, working with our clients, and we take more time than most. The bottom line was when I left the project yesterday was, well, how much is this going to cost? When can you get started? How long is it going to take? The 3 questions you always get. But, it's like, I'm trying to write back an email to him last night saying, it isn't about what's up front in the cost. There's so many things that are going to be, decisions are going to have to be made. And I can't make those decisions until I get into the job. Once I tear the poison oak out and I cut up all the dead brush and I take out the blackberry, all of a sudden you're going to have a tree, and then you're going to have to decide whether you want to keep the tree, prune the tree, or just leave it alone. But there's a lot that has to be unraveled. So for me to just give you a flat price, it's like, well, one of us is going to lose here, and I'm hoping it isn't going to be me, but I also don't want to scare you away with, oh, it's going to be, 2 weeks worth of work, and it's $2,000 a day. And they're automatically thinking, oh God, I can't afford that. That's just too expensive. And I'm like, well, how about half of that? Let's just do half of that. And they expect the whole job to be done for half. And you're like, that's not what I said. That's what you asked. And I'm trying to give you what you need. But I know your decisions are based financially. And there are people who have unlimited pocketbooks. And I've been into those pocketbooks, and I've been given a chance to do things with no price, no limits. And then question as to, am I really getting my money's worth? And I'm like, well, compared to what? Compared to somebody who doesn't have the knowledge and the ability and the skills? Well, yeah, sure. But you know what? You don't have the knowledge, the ability, or the skills. So how can you make the comparisons?
Right.
That's what I run into constantly, because I try to work local. I'm the guy who's like the neighbor guy who does the community work. And I'm not looking to go 90 miles away just to make a profit.
Right.
And that profit is there, but I don't want to go down there. I want to drive my tractor. I want to drive, I'd like to walk to the job. So I undersell myself 9 times out of 10 because I'm trying to get people to build, character with me, or an understanding with me that I'm here for, you. Mostly I'm there for the trees. But, if you want to hire someone that lives 30, 60, 80 miles away, go right ahead. They're going to charge you windshield time coming and going.
Right.
They're probably going to get, their breaks during the day. And, I can't say you get what you pay for.
Right.
Because that isn't usually the case.
Interesting. Tony's been diligently listening, and he likes to do that, but I always like to draw him out of the shadows. And Tony's second generation arborist. So I'm curious what your summarization, if you were the able to summarize or where your thoughts are at and what we've been talking about so far.
Yeah, I'm always listening. When you're talking to someone like Bob, you just listen. Yeah, I agree. I think that, you're talking about people valuing trees, and like Dwayne and you both, alluded to, it does often come down to money. I think what people don't understand is the return on investment of trees, because they're not willing to invest the time. And like Dwayne said, a lot of times that return on investment might not be for 300 years. Like they'll never see it. So it's the ultimate in buying green bananas, planting trees, right? Like, you got to have faith in the future. And it's, in the case of a tree, it's probably a future without you in it. And that's, once people get that, then they can kind of start to see it, because, 30 years in this business, which is not long by, the comparisons here on this show, but I've learned that, trees do talk to you. They just speak really slow. I'm just starting to get the message after 30 years. They've been saying it, and I'm just now catching the first couple words because it took them, so long to say those words. But it is awesome. When you look at it, I think if people can invest and look at it from a future standpoint, you can't put a price to it, right? How do you replace a 150-year-old tree?
You just have to learn the language of trees.
Exactly, right. And it's a really slow language. I think I've referred to it before, with the Lord of the Rings and the characters of the Ents. I thought it was fantastic that the Ents spoke so slow, that like everybody would get impatient, but it's like they had such valuable things to say, but you're going to need some time.
Yeah, it's a really good example. For me, I guess, in my stage of life, whatever that is, I find myself more thinking more about, life and purpose and what more spiritual things, more, what are we doing here and how do we fit and how does everything connect? And, trees to me are such an unbelievable example, of that sense of longevity and for us to understand that what we do now, like you said, Tony, the benefits of which won't be fully realized till long after we're gone, and the tree benefits how many generations of people, the, big old trees and parks and how, just how long they actually exist for. There is no other living thing on the planet that is alive, that lives for as long. There's no ocean creature. There's, I guess there may be some fungi, but they're not as prominent or as easy to connect with as trees, and that, they release, chemicals and oxygen and carbon dioxide. Like there's just so much, I think, yet to be learned about not just plant intelligence, but tree intelligence as a way for us to function as a species almost. But it's having the time and patience to take it all in. I know it's getting pretty esoteric here, but I think I'm in good company with that. And, and Shigo was right along all that stuff.
Yeah. And he left us a lot to work with and to carry it out. You and I, we use his material to carry that message.
Correct.
I do every day.
Yeah.
And I do what I can with the camera and with what words I can use to describe what I take pictures of. And a large part of that is depending on the audience. If it's a women's club, it's a different audience than, a tree climbing group that gets together and wants to learn, the newest, latest, fastest way to get in and out of a tree. But when it's the old ladies club, it's, they want to learn different types of things, but you don't teach them tree planting because they're not really going to take that message out to teach the people. They'll be there, they'll stand, they'll watch, they'll make the selection, but will they actually, that's planted too low. No, you need to make the hole a little bit bigger. No, you need to move the roots out. That's not that. But each audience, like I said, thanks to technology, I'm able to put PowerPoint presentations together. I'm able to integrate photographs. I'm able to take excerpts from publications and integrate them so that, the message can continue to keep being brought out. Yeah, we have to live on not an infinite amount of time. So we do what we can. And when we're asked to do it, we do the best we can. Yeah. But, we're not always the volunteers that stand up and say, yeah, no, I'll give a talk on that. It's more like when you're asked, you produce and you provide. And, like you're not as old as I am. You're 13 years younger than I am. And so I look at the same thing. And I just know that as long as I have the ability to communicate, I'll continue to keep carrying the message.
Right.
And again, thanks to Alex for doing all the hard work. And, there are other people who have also done a tremendous amount of work. And I can't say that it's outdated. It just hasn't been put into the hands of the people that need to use it. Mm-hmm. I've been lucky to have dozens of mentors who were, previously in the profession, and they've given me their insights. Okay. And they echo in my head every day I go out. I hear them talking in the back of my head, right. Be it Don Blair's father Millard or Leslie Main or Dick Harris or even Bailey Hudson, and there's just so many people who have carried the passion, and we're doing, we kind of blend it like shuffling the cards sometimes, but, we try to deal out there the information to the right people.
And that's exactly one of the things which that the podcast has kind of evolved into, I think is fair to say, is that, one of the things that Don was really excited about is that there's some type of posterity in the way of audio that people can listen to and just, listen to different perspectives from people all over. And I know I've been blessed to have met so many individuals from all over. We're having an interview with a lovely lady arborist from Norway after this. And we have connections all over, and it's like the roots of a forest. Our human forest is so vast and, intercontinental. We got roots that go right through the ocean to the other continents, and connecting that and connecting people. I think we'd be a little remiss in not talking a bit about the climbing background. I mean, you're obviously, I don't know. I don't know. You probably still are climbing, but you spent years climbing, competing, and you had some of the most significant innovations. I think when I think back to watching you give seminars, and I was a competitive climber myself, but I think there's a lot of innovations that you've never been credited for, and that you really had a hand in, and or certainly were the first to introduce it to a lot of people. And somehow, I mean, your name hasn't been quite as recognized in all of arboriculture, but certainly in California. But can you just talk to us a little bit about that progression for you, and some of the things that and where you were, like, was it the fact that you're third generation that you were able to come up with some of the stuff you did? And I can't even remember it all. And there's stuff that I wish I could remember that I saw you show that I wish that I know was an innovation, but I can't remember exactly how to do it.
Some things just fall into your laps, and sometimes you take something that somebody has shown you and you develop it, and it evolves.
Right.
They brought it to you, and it's this and this and that, but I'm not sure. And then all of a sudden, a light goes off in your head, and you go, "Oh, yeah, if I do this, I'll get that." And I mean, how to install from the ground a static retrievable false crotch is not something that just came out of thin air. I was, in a bathtub, and all of a sudden I went, "Oh my God, I've got the idea." I closed my eyes and I said to my buddy, I said, "Hey, get me a pencil and a piece of paper. I'm going to draw this out." And I did it with my eyes closed. And he goes, "That's it. That's how it works." And that was back 30 years ago, but it closed the gap, and it allowed for us to get a block up in a tree from the ground that we could retrieve once we got back down to the ground. And that was the start of mechanical advantage for me.
Right.
And then it just evolved with, okay, well, now we've got the block up in the tree, we've got our ropes and we're tied in, but we still have to lift our weight. Now, how can we change that? Well, we'll run it down through a tender, a not tender, a pulley, and then bring it back up to where we get the mechanical advantage. And that is, we take a micro adjuster and put it on the line above the knot and put the rope back through the pulley, and you slide that up either with a throw line or a pole pruner or just your hand. And all of a sudden now you're only picking up 1/3 your weight. And Daniele, help me here.
Zanzi from Italy.
Zanzi, yes, was the first one who walked up to me and just explained to me what mechanical advantage was. I mean, I really had no idea what dead weight was, to how to split that weight, and you're only doing now 1/3 the amount of energy. Yeah, you're only going up as far as you're not going as far as fast. Okay, because foot locking was the way to go. It was the fastest way to get up a rope.
Right.
But it was also extremely tiring, and and not everybody could do it.
Right.
Some of us were lucky enough to do it and do it well and get good times.
Yeah.
But as time went on, and I got a little heavier, it got a little harder, and my body said, there's got to be a better way. So devising mechanical advantage was good, not only to climb, but it also benefited me in actually lifting pieces off the ground, loading them onto carts and putting them into trucks, again, without having to have to go through the physical strain, because I didn't always have cranes and I didn't have, winches. So that helped. But then that blossomed into so many different things. And then the best part is, I share it with someone like Mark Chisholm, and all of a sudden I'm going into Phoenix on a plane, and I'm getting a call on a plane, and Mark's going, I've got this other great idea. And so he takes it and he runs with it, and then he shares it back with me. And so we bounce things back and forth. And, to the people who are interested, as I know he is, as I am, it's all about, getting things done with less effort. We've all done the hard work. Right. Let's just try to find a way to do it a little easier. But, same with redirects and other various ideas.
The evolution of the stationary rope techniques that have, and I think one of the biggest advantages there is that we got techniques now where we're not having to lift our arms above our heads. John Ball's done research now and talks about how much significantly difference there is in energy output from simply by not having to lift your arms above your shoulders. As soon as you are doing an activity where your arm goes above your shoulders and your arm, the higher they go, it's remarkable how much more energy is expended. And you think of old style footlocking, my goodness. It's part of what made it romantically wonderful. It was so grueling. And when you got fit enough to be able to do it regularly and effectively and efficiently, that was a real sense of accomplishment. But it definitely had an expiration. Any of us that did it, there reaches a point where this is just too freaking hard, man. Like it's frustrating and sad, but it's true. It's reality. So do you think the new innovations and even though with SRS, I find there's not really a mechanical advantage per se, but we're using different muscle groups.
Very true. But I also use a Raptor and a run and lift. So
right.
I'm no fool here. I want my career to last as long as possible. So I'll make the investment. And it's not only an investment for me, it's an investment for other people that are on the job. For instance, one gentleman I worked with, he didn't want to use it. Insisted that he body thrust everything. Wow. I'm like, wow. Gets up to the tree, drops his handsaw. He has to come back down because I refused to tie it on the rope. I'm like, hey, you dropped it. Come get it. He comes back. And second time he drops his handsaw. Must have been a cold morning. Anyhow, he turns to me and he goes, all right, hook up that Raptor. I'm going up for the first time. And his first time, he went and bought one.
Yeah.
It was it. He realized that it changed his way of doing the work. So not always did the first time, you drag the horse to water, whether they're going to drink it or not. But it takes a while sometimes. And showing them isn't always the best way. Sometimes they have to find out for themselves. Yeah. So it was a nice for me. And then when the run and lift came along, every one of these things has come with a learning experience and a learning disaster. Okay. I remember the first couple times with the Raptor, I'd go right up to the crotch. And as soon as I got my weight off the crotch, the Raptor would get sucked up into the crotch. And now I couldn't get it undone and I couldn't get my rope out of it. And I had to have somebody, on the ground, of course, tie it in, undo it so I could slack it off. And the run and lift wasn't much different. There was times when I didn't feed the rope in right and it shredded the rope. And now I have to send the whole unit back, to have it taken apart, to get the rope back out of it. Just that learning experience is tough.
Yeah.
When you're anxious to get into the work and get, things done, you're like, oh God, I forgot this. And I almost passed out more than once under the underside of a tree limb because I was trapped.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And I learned because the lanyard from the Raptor has to be longer than your tie-in to it. Because, otherwise you can't, if you can't get the slack out to undo the snap, now you're stuck. So then you're always in a compromised position.
Yeah.
I learned early on, and I must have been 16, the ground comes up hard when you're falling. And I have been in trees that have uprooted and crashed. I've been in trees where limbs are broke and I wasn't tied in. I've been in, I pulled trees over on top of me, but the one when I fell out the first time was a little tough, getting the wind knocked out of you. And then for the rest of your life, you have cracked, crushed, and condensed vertebrae. Probably not the smartest thing I ever did. But I, got back up in the tree and finished out the day. That's what tree men do,
Right.
as far as I know. But so a lot of this is a lot of what I do is predicated on the disasters that I've had and prevention that it won't happen again. And you're right. There are some innovations that have come along, and a lot of it has to do again with Rudy Rasmussen. Was another gentleman who came into my life and dropped the box of equipment on my lap, like a gree and a micro ascender, and just said, "Here, figure it out. Do something with it." He was with Petzl.
Yeah,
and I was like, I don't know what any of this stuff does. And a week later, he calls back, and I could use everything, like 5 or 6 different ways because I knew I dropped it on the right lap. And it was like, wow, night and day. Changed my life. Let's just say with mechanical advantage. So otherwise, I never would have used that equipment.
Yeah.
It wasn't getting paid for it. It was just here's a box of equipment. I was told that I should give this to you. Okay, great. And then, as when you get into the larger crowds and like TCI Expo, there's a challenge there to bring something new to the table. I mean, you've got to think, just like tree climbing competition, you have 364 days to think of something that's going to beat the competition, something new. And darn it if I haven't shot myself in the foot more than once because it didn't work that day or something happened and it screwed up and I went from first to 23rd. But it was always the challenge of what can I do to beat Bob Hunter? I got to beat Bob. If I can get past him, I might have a shot at it. But heck, there's times when simplest thing, somebody ties a figure 8 at the end of your climbing line, thinking they're doing the right thing, and the figure 8 gets caught in the crotch as you're pulling your line through, and you can't pull your line out. And nobody told you that they put the figure 8 in. And then you're just like, you're screwed. I mean, North Dakota, I don't know if you remember that one. And I got into the tree. Well, let's back that up. Go back to Urbana. I went up and down in the tree in like 25 seconds in an aerial rescue. But at that time, we were able to put a prusik on the injured climber's line and go up and bring the climber down. I forgot to say, check for dial 911.
Right.
Okay. And then the next year we do it, and I forgot to check the breathing, bleeding, and broken bones. It was DQ'd. So you do things in such fashion that you've tried to do it in a form that you can repeat it. But doggone it, when it comes to game day, there's things that just you screw up on.
Oh man, the tree climbing competition, there is more element of random fuckery that can take place. It's astonishing. Like I was second 7 or 9 times in our chapter. I won 2 or 3 times, but all the years in between, I was second place. I'm not on the trophy. My name doesn't appear. And I lost to the same person like 6 times in a row by like second. But there's no record of that. It's just. And it was always some, I really struggled to wonder, was it me or was it just, fate or luck or I don't know. And I remember watching you at times and seeing, like, relating very much to just how could that have happened? I remember even Dan made the Masters, I don't know, like 7 times before he finally had a run that didn't have some weird thing happen. I remember Todd Kramer in Hawaii, who was pretty much on his way to win the sucker, and then he dropped his micropulley, and that was it. He was out of the tree, and he was probably winning it. But that's now it's left to folklore and history, right? Like you dropped and he almost caught it, like he had it, and but now it's just a story, right? And you experienced that many times.
Well, I started in 75. I stopped in 2005, and every year I can tell you who I lost to.
So you won some too, Bob, right?
I had my chances to win in our regional, of course, not at the international level, but Oh yeah, yeah. No, I only the wall can tell you that have all the plaques and trophies on it. Where I placed. I have 9 of those second place trophies myself. So
Yeah.
and every one of them was either Sam Noonan, Bob Hunter, or there was just a slew of people that. And the good thing is that those guys went on to win the international, so I didn't feel too bad that I lost second place to them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting in my years, as a competitive climber, and, same story you had, like I lost more than I won, but I think it worked out for me because as a volunteer at the ITCC, I was working with all the second and third place people, and it was so awesome, right? Like we had our own club, like because a lot of the volunteers, like you didn't win. So, well, I took the time off because I was planning on winning. So I'm going to volunteer. And kind of how I did it. Like, well, what are you doing here again? Well, I was planning on winning and that didn't work out. So I had the time off. So here I am. But it was so much fun to set those trees up with literally the second best climbers in the world. We called ourselves. Yeah, but I mean, I can't impress upon people listening enough how much that changed my career. And I think everybody's right. Winning would not have given me as many benefits as losing did when it came to the ITCC.
Couldn't agree more.
Interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. Again, it was just 364 more days till competition, and every day you're thinking, because you're out on the job and all you're doing is thinking about, ways to be more innovative. And, the big shot changed a lot.
Yeah, I remember that. It was. Yeah. Yeah, I find it fascinating watching when. I think it has to have the steepest learning curve and requires the most concentration and presence and nerves. If nerves are going to screw you up anywhere, they're definitely going to screw you up in throw line. It's such a finesse precision activity. It requires you to be really focused and dialed in. I think it's one of the things that, probably the greatest legacy of Ken Palmer was that throw that he had to make to win the third title. Back, and there was no Masters. He knew by the way the points were that he had to score the top shot with his first shot to win because Bob was right there. And like everybody knew it. Like everybody's watching this one throw on this hot, muggy, brutal day in, was it North Carolina? Anyway.
Hilton Head?
Yeah, it was Hilton Head. And everybody knew if he makes this shot, he wins the Triple Crown. And if he misses, he doesn't get it, and it was like, you talk about pressure. Like I thought pressure was coming home and your wife's having coffee with your girlfriend. I don't know. I think but it's that particular skill, and that's where the big shot, like you say, I'm always curious how I should ask somebody that's been in the Masters lately in the last decade what their thought process is in choosing what they're going to shoot in. I often will see people take 1 or 2 shots and then they go to the big shot. So like they're hoping to make it, but then they're quick to abandon and say, I'm going to make damn sure to get in this tree. Now at least they can take as many shots as they want, but time's a ticking, right? So I don't know. If you were in the Masters, what would you do, Bob?
Hands down, I'd use the big shot. I'm a sure thing for me. My arm doesn't throw like it used to.
No.
I mean, I was an overhand thrower for years until the sandbag came along. So, because we had the rubber pair, and I throw like a softball, and so it was no big deal. And I had 9 first place, and they were all overhand. So, and nobody threw overhand. No. Nobody threw the pair after the sandbag came along. I can tell you that.
Yeah, the throw ball, right?
Yeah, it would bounce around and.
Sometimes it work in your favor though, that bouncing,
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
And knowing the rules.
We always dubbed that the ricochet biscuit. It wasn't a throw ball; it was a ricochet biscuit.
It was
perfect. Yeah. If you can't get in the tree, you can't compete. So, throw line was the key to the whole success of that, at least for me, because when I started, Bob Hunter was right behind me with his, footlock fancy. And there's just no way you're going to beat the guy who sets a world record. Kind of like Mark Chisholm, you're already going to learn you're going to play second. You got to win somewhere else because you're not going to win that event.
Right.
I was so thankful when he retired.
I remember Bettis talking about that, and it was one of the things that, he said he knew he had to place decently, but he also said he really only needed to get fourth in every event in order to, because it really all that mattered was the Masters. He never focused on winning an event, and he knew he couldn't win the speed events just as he got older. And strength-wise, there's he's no way Bettis is going to footlock faster than Mark Chisholm, just size and length and thrust, so, and age even separation. So I found it interesting because he said, I just got to get fourth, fourth or better. And as long as I do that, I'm in the Masters, and then none of it matters anymore, which was quite interesting, for the guy that won the most internationals of anyone. Interesting philosophy, right?
Right.
And I find it interesting. We talked a bit about that. It's somewhat biased to the younger climber, like the older you get, you just ain't going to be as fast. And 2 events are all about speed. And, it was one of the things he felt, if he was strategic about his retirement because age ultimately was going to be the only thing that was going to keep him from getting in the Masters, not winning the Masters, from getting in it, which I found quite interesting, and that was because of the speed events, which, for all of us in time, I think even Mark would probably agree with that at this point.
Well, the last time I competed, I was able to get to 11 seconds on a 40-foot climb. And then I went to 50 feet when I was retiring. And it took a full 60 seconds to get there. And when I came down out of that tree, I looked at Sam Noonan and I said, don't ever let me compete again. That was so embarrassing.
It was,
forget that.
It is remarkable. And I don't know if it's just learned and practiced, but that going from 40 to 50 I felt the same way. And I mean, I was later on in my career also, but that was almost a death blow. Like it changed it remarkably. I don't know, Tony, if you were there for the transition, if you remember going from 40 to 50 and suddenly going, what the hell happened to my wind?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think for me, it was more of a timing thing because you got so used to practicing at 40. Because I learned pretty early from Mark Chisholm, as a volunteer, as being like the second best climber in the chapter as a volunteer to footlock, that you just counted your strokes, right? So basically what Mark would do is he'd just know that he'd have to basically footlock, say 7 times, and he'd reach for the bell. So I practiced that way. And then when they moved it up to 50, it just threw the timing off. And I was close to the end. So I'm like, yeah, there's the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm done with this one.
I can so appreciate that.
I wonder if there's a correlation in the, we started talking about, being so passionate about tree work and trees that, we almost willing to sacrifice our own livelihood, so to speak, like do the job for free just to know the tree's going to get taken care of properly. Do you think there's a correlation between people that competitively climbed and have that type of passion or not?
I would honestly couldn't tell you, it's 50-50. I know people that don't have passion that are just in for the competition. And I know some of my best, most compassionate climbers never competed and never wanted to enter into the arena. They didn't want to be judged by others. It wasn't their game. Right. It was not why they got into tree work. I didn't get into tree work to compete, but I'm a competitor. Ask my basketball buddies and my softball buddies, and you want to play horseshoes, it doesn't matter. I'm not there to lose. I'm there to win. It's one thing if you're going to lose to, your wife or something, but, somebody's going to feel good about this. But no, honestly, competition just stumbled into me. I went down to visit Dick Alvarez to be exposed to the intercompany tree climbing competition. And I got the bug, and I came back the next year and competed. And yeah, I got slapped down, and then the next year I came back and I got third and fourth, and I was like, oh, this isn't so bad. And then I came back and it got better and better and increased. And I learned from the old boys, Cecil and Tom Smith, both were early competitors. And there was just a whole slew early on competitors that came from the West Coast. So I had great exposure.
Right.
There's no doubt, you knew you weren't going to win, but you gave it everything you had, and you try to get better every year, mostly with technique.
And I think the group conscience that is created with the environment of the competition, but just people gathering and talking and sharing, I don't recall there really ever, well, it was rare to find negative or antagonistic type, like no one booed.
Yeah.
There was always positive, and everyone wishing the best for each other, even though it might cost you the title, you're still going to cheer the guy.
Absolutely. It was beer and barbecue,
Right.
There's your reward.
I think it's changed a little bit, because I remember when I first got involved, it was the only game in town for the tribe to get together. Right. It was
yes.
Whether you're a competitor or volunteer, what it was. And then with you, Bob, I loved competing. It was fun. I loved the thing. But then also I got so much more out of the tribe and the community end of it. So I tell people now, it's like, 3 levels. You can go and watch, you can go and volunteer, you can go and compete, but pick one and go. And I think it's lost a little bit of that importance with just, as technology's increased, and there are people that just go straight for the competition, which is fine, whatever. I'd run your show the way you want to run your show. But the sense of community is still there. But I don't think it's as vital anymore, because now there's other ways. Well, we can have conversations like this, and social media has changed it a little bit. So it's not the only game in town. Still a pretty good game, though, right? I highly recommend everyone go to a chapter comp and get out of your bubble, because I think that's the chapter comps, I think, are really where the rubber meets the road, right? I think you'll get so much out of getting out of your little bubble, meeting people and talking and networking, and you just can't overstate that.
A chance to learn. You can improve your skill level by learning and observing, and that a lot of it has been benefited by the competition, the exposure. Because otherwise we're just in our own little bubbles, and we, prove to ourselves, but we don't have a chance to compare with others. And this was a wonderful platform. Yeah, it came along at a time. I mean, the first competition was in 48. Then it came back in the early 50s. But then it just went into hiatus until line clearance came along and became an issue. And we, as an insurance company, they wanted us to demonstrate how we were training our personnel. And so all the events are all basically related to line clearance tree trimming. Heck, that's what the weighted station's all about. Don't want to have the tree touch the wire, so, don't put all your weight on the tree limb. Duh.
Interesting. And same with the rescue event and the 3-minute thing that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. It was all had it. I didn't know. I never thought about all the events, but I knew that rescue roots lied in the utility sector, but I didn't realize it was all. So what year would that, when would that have all come about? So basically you're saying it was a way to demonstrate not only the skill, but the competence of an individual to avoid hitting wires and effectively moving around in a tree.
Absolutely. That's what it was all about.
Wow.
Fall protection, as well as aerial rescue, because of people getting zapped and just hanging in the tree and dying. But it was all about proving to the insurance company. And it came around about 1973. There were 7 manuals that were developed and several different levels in tree work. And one of them was aerial rescue, but it was all geared towards the safe demonstration of performing the skills. And Dick Alvarez isn't here to talk about it. Neither is Steve, for that matter. Rick is still around, but Rick wasn't really the competitor that Steve was. And Richard was kind of like, I want to say he dusted it off. He and Bailey Hudson dusted it off and brought it back as a company, because he wanted his intercompany to learn techniques and methods to prove themselves. So that's how the competition got into it. But then it was opened up to the public, and they said, hey, we might be able to have some fun with this. We might be able to, stir some competition and get other people to share their ideas. So let's do a tree climbing jamboree. And so again, I was right there when it started. So, and my being that my father was in the line clearance business, and so was Richard, they collaborated in their training methods. So it helped, like getting.
So was it like PG&E and like those types of companies, utilities that said we want to see evidence of your skill?
No, it was insurance company.
Oh, the insurance company, right? Sorry, you said that. So were they involved in auditing and watching? Like they would come and you'd have to, like how was that demonstrated to them? How did they evaluate that?
PG&E used it to show the insurance companies that they were making an effort to train. So the PG&E people would come out, the line clearance representatives, but they would also use it as a means to show, hey, we're making an effort here to, safety is safety first. Always think safety. Huh. Those were the, part of the roots of it.
The origin of site safety, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at it, the speed events were mostly just a competition thing. And throw line wasn't much different, but you also had to have targets, to make it at different levels. And most of the time it was never more than 45 feet off the ground.
Because of power lines.
So, and the first couple were just coiled up ropes. There wasn't even a throw line. It wasn't until the throw pair, what'd you call that thing? The ricochet ball, the ricochet disc.
Yeah.
That came along. Then that started to change things. But then again, people would throw it over the top and they'd throw it over the wires. It would bounce and it'd hit the wires. I can't tell you how many times that has happened to me. But, the trick was to just let go. And hopefully, thank you. And then get sticks and whatnot to throw it, but hope the wires wouldn't slap together. And
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So where did the throw line, do you have an idea of the origin of throw line?
Oh, I'm sure that, you could date it back tying a string to a rock back in the 30s. But for the large part, it was just coil rope and toss, and that was it. Coil and toss. So, yeah, I don't know. I know that I have seen things, anything that you could tie with a weight to a kite string was a throw line. So, but yeah, I can appreciate where it's come.
Interesting.
Because
that's one thing I've never thought of. I've never heard, like, we talk about the bouncy ball, the throw ball, or the throw biscuit, or the bouncing biscuit, whatever it was, but the concept of putting a thin line on, and then the beanbag. Like I think Don was talking. I think that it was New Tribe that built the first sort of bean sandbag type thing, was it?
Yeah,
Tom Ness. Yeah,
Tom Ness.
So maybe the string came around. Maybe its origins lie in there.
Well, definitely for the throwback. Yeah. I mean, those were the first ones I bought. Yeah,
okay.
And then eventually they blew up, and you found out what was inside them. It's just sand.
It was sand?
Yeah. It started out with like corn husk, and then it varied depending, But yeah, a lot of times it was just sand. That's why they call it a sandbag. So.
Wow, I never knew. I always thought it was shot. Like,
well, there was that was an evolution. But you got to think organically. That's why I said corn was one of the first things. So, yeah, you never know what's inside of these things till you break them open.
Yeah.
True.
Well, I guess you think of that game you play with the corn bags, right?
Thank you.
And throwing
cornhole.
Yeah, and I remember you could get throw bags that were like square cornhole bags. They had a ring on them, but they were just fat and huge and got stuck. And
I have a lot of all that stuff. I don't throw anything away. So true.
Wow. Yeah. So where is the Museum of Arboriculture Artifacts?
It's scattered in a lot of people's garages. Don Blair has, claim that he has the East Coast Museum, and you're not going to get people flocking to it. I do have people come to my house and they just marvel at what, like you say, what's on the walls. And, I try to keep it so that it's not tucked away and thrown away and eaten by mice. And, I'm proud of it. There's no doubt. I inherited 35 crosscut saws, but I didn't realize how each of them were special. Some were ice saws, some were finishing cut saws, some were, the different styles of crosscut saws. And Jerry Baranek shows up one day and he starts to tell me what, each one of these saws is. And I was like, wow, I had no idea that there was even a difference. They look a little different, but there was difference. Just like the crosscut saw used to be one of the competition events. I don't know about in your chapter.
Really?
Yeah, out here we had, that was the big event because anybody could do it. And Rick Royce was a gentleman who would win every year. He and his brother would win, and nobody could beat them. And we tried everything we could because we had the saws, right? So Chris Beer and myself, we're trying to sharpen the saws and get them ready and all this. Never won. One day, Rick's brother didn't show up. He taps me on the shoulder. He says, "Robert, you want to compete with me?" I said, "Absolutely." And I got my first and only first place trophy because Rick tapped me on the shoulder and says, "Come on, let's go do this." And I'm like, "Yeah."
So what was his secret?
Pull, don't push. It's very key. You never want to push a crosscut saw. You always want to pull, and then just getting your feet stable, and getting in sync with your partner. But yeah, it would take. Chris and I would do it. It'd take a minute and a half, and Rick Royce, his brother, would do it. Rick and Dennis, and they would do it in like 27 seconds. And you're like, I don't get it. And it would be, a 2-foot round log, usually softwood, but there's a interesting art in how to sharpen a crosscut saw that, it can take 40 hours to sharpen a crosscut saw if you want to do it right, to get the kerf right and to get, the raker gauges at the right and everything. It's all about getting the curl, and the length of the curl needs to be like 4 and 5 inches. It's an interesting design, a lost art, I'm sure. But driven to win that award. I wanted to win every award at least once.
Right.
Yeah.
As we all do. And hence competition is born, right?
Right. Thank you. And international changed a lot of that, especially when it brought in, like you said, Bettis and people from, other continents, because there were methods there that we had no idea what they were doing. And it was great to have that venue, introduced, and so we could share. It's one thing to, your own intercompany. It's another to go up and down the state. It's another to go from state to state and then finally get over to, other continents like Australia, for instance. So, yeah, because their trees are taller and their techniques are a little more different. Yeah.
Yep.
You're fighting gravity no matter what.
Yeah, it's a fascinating, fun industry. And, anybody that's probably listening to the podcast has been bitten what I like to call the tree bug. And, you can't really explain it. It's just, and I don't know if the word is addictive or inspired, but it just, it happened to me, and I've never, ever left the industry. It seems like a lot of people these days are 5-10 years out of a career and they choose something completely different. And I somehow have never left this industry of arboriculture. And most of the people I know are like that too, as a result. But it's always been rewarding, fun, and interesting, and then I think I've been fortunate, like yourself, to meet people along the way, like you or Shigo particularly, just because he brought such another element to the whole concept, of appreciation to the tree itself and understanding it as an organism and as an entity, not just something you climbed and cut.
Absolutely. And today, with the technology changing such as it is, I still find it fascinating with spider lifts. I call them spider lifts, but with track lifts and the heights and the distances and the configurations, I'm the first that wants to get into them. The equipment comes out to the job site, it comes with an operator. It's like, no, I want to operate it. I want to play with this thing and see how it works. So, the battery powered saws is a whole nother, ballpark. I just assume leave every gas powered saw I have on the shelf. Certainly they don't have the big saws yet battery powered, but pole saws, hand saws, I am all about the batteries. I hate to drop them, but certainly I don't like the smell. I don't like the noise. I don't like the vibration, but I really, the battery has really changed how I look at doing work.
Yeah.
Just for me, anyhow.
Well, and I think that's another thing that's key to a lot of people that stay in the business a long time, is and I think it's partly has to do with stimulus and response. Like you have to be open-minded and willing, and always like to learn and to try something different. And the minute you stop doing that, I think is when you start going in the wrong direction. Alex would talk about. It really is. You don't stay still or static or balanced for very long. You're going one direction or another, and open-mindedness and willingness is such a vital key to keeping the I don't know, just to staying alive, I think.
It's a stimulus, and then there's the other three words I use is the irritation, the stimulation, and the motivation. And those are three words I live by, because
Right.
there are times when I'm irritated to change. I make change, and
Right.
that's what stimulates me. Otherwise, I might not change. So there are things that come along and make me change. And a lot of times it's just somebody irritating me. And it doesn't matter, it could just be words, it could be actions, but I won't go into it in any other depth. But those three words are a lot of what I live, what make me change.
Yeah. Well, I know for me, the one I think of often is the gift of desperation.
Yes, thank you.
Like
Right.
being so frustrated with whatever it is that you are motivated to make a change that you ordinarily would not.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Irritation is a good example. What do you think, Tony? Irritation. What was it? Irritation, desperation, and innovation?
Stimulation, motivation.
Yep. I subscribe to the thought that we change for two reasons. It's either inspiration or desperation, right? You either have a great idea or you just can't take it anymore. Usually it's the second one.
And the inspiration is key to that, because, I have a lot of the first pieces of equipment because I was willing to make the change. I just,
Right.
I love the lowering device. You can't get me to not use something else. I love the pole saw, the extendable pole saw. When we could go from 8 foot to 10 foot, 12 foot pole pruners, I went to 8 to 10 to 12 foot pole pruners. I mean, those were just, you had to make the investment, but you would always find the blower on my truck and the broom on somebody else's, because I didn't have any problem getting the blower. I wanted to get home. I had things to do, places to go, girls to date. So I get out of here, get back to do what you want to do.
Well, I think too, and I've seen it in you, Bob, and I've seen it in other people we've had on the podcast that have been at it for so
Yes.
long and have stayed so active and have done so much. It's just that constant sense of curiosity, right? It's not that there's always a better way, but always looking for something new and different, or finding when something gets stale, finding something to keep it interesting again. Which kind of brings me to a question I like to ask someone of your experience and skill level. It's like, so you're an arborist, you're a climbing arborist, you've been in this industry for, say 4 or 5 years. You're pretty good. What's next? Right? So you're a good climber, your skill set's pretty good, you're pretty good with your equipment. Where do you go from there? How do you stay curious?
Mine is going to be completely different than most, but I do see what you're saying. People get in for a period of time and then they lose, like, Dwayne said, they lose interest and they move on, try to find another career because it's not working out for them. I find if you're working for yourself, you're probably going to be easier to motivate than to working with somebody or working for somebody, because you're limited, because your wages are only going to be so much for so long. Unless you're a contract climber, you're kind of going to put yourself in a position where it's just a daily wage. And I'm more about, making the most of my time. So being independent and broadcasting into potentially other aspects of the profession, graduating up into, if you want to get to the learning more about trees and becoming a consultant and working to help people integrate into the forest. What we do is, because we don't just get a barren plot of land. We get a plot of land with a lot of trees. and it comes with a lot of headaches. And like you said earlier, there's a value to it, but there's an investment to it. And helping people learn and understand that is, how you get people that are 4 and 5 year climbers. Yeah, they're competent. I was cocky. There's no doubt. I thought I was, the top of the walk, but I was handed a lot of humble pie by a lot of people who, had been in the profession for a lot of years, because how did they stay motivated? How did they stay interested? And they, unfortunately, I hate to use the word buzzard, but they would go out on their own and find work that was higher paying. Boom, they started their own tree service. When we started out, there was one, maybe 2 people, and they came from my grandfather's company, and they started their little tree services. And then all of a sudden, there's 85 tree services, and probably 90% of those people came from those 3 companies. So they didn't venture far. They didn't move in from anywhere else, but they started from within, and they all have been very. They've operated comfortably through the years. So, yeah, how to motivate somebody to stay.
And was there an acceptance and a spirit of abundance that allowed for that without animosity or competitive nature? To we are all competitive, but co-opetition rather than competition. Like, how does that? Because I think that's a big thing. People fear. I got this guy started. I trained him, taught him everything he knows. Now I took half my clients and left. The son of a bitch. But yet then I know others that it's like, hey, good for you. You're gonna. You'll be able to guide your own path and future better than if you're trying to, just work for someone necessarily, which there's nothing wrong with working for people either. I think it depends on the organization, but like, how did your family reconcile that with knowing you created half the companies out there?
You just had to learn to let go. I know when our company was bought by Bartlett, I wasn't a fit. There was no way I was going to fit. Even though I was good personal friends with Bob Bartlett, I just knew that I was going to have a problem because somebody that I had hired had now become my foreman.
Right.
Or became my supervisor, or became the manager of the company. And I couldn't take it anymore. I started out as a supervisor. I went back to a foreman. I went back to a guy on the crew to where I was the highest paid groundman on the job. I lasted 1 year. Hired on my birthday, fired on my birthday. So what did I do? I go to a company that was in our area, and it was a tree care co-op. And we had like 8 people who had their own business, had their own equipment, and you paid a certain fee for insurance coverage, but you ran your own company, had your own equipment. And so it was great because every month we'd get together and we would have, like you said, that camaraderie of everybody sitting in the same room talking about whatever the issues were. But we had our own like territories that we worked in. And for 15 years, that worked great for me. And then when I moved on from there, I started my own company, separate from, the co-op. And I was sad to leave it because it was so easy. There was an administrator that took care of all of the responsibilities of doing all the paperwork. All we had to do is go out and work, send the check in, they'd send the check back. And, it was like a real simple way to do business. That's how I got around it. But yeah, as far as the animosity, I couldn't agree more. The more foreman I can remember taking a stack of job tags off, the desk and leaving and never coming back and starting their own business. Those people got a lot of animosity. But the other people that decided that they could walk away and start their own business largely had been starting their own business behind our backs without us even knowing it. They were suddenly dropping the rates and getting the work. And next thing you know, it's like, oh, what happened to Jimmy? Jimmy just left one day. Yeah, Jimmy's got his own company. It's funny how those old clients are in our own files. And
right.
But at that point, like I said, we just had to let go.
But isn't it interesting? I don't know anyone that's really suffered, it really, like I don't think we've yet come even close to saturating. Now, maybe there's just more people and more housing and there's just more being developed. But, Tony, you talk a lot about the spirit of abundance, or your brother's company, you guys must have had people start their businesses out, like having learned how to be and run a business from working with you. How do you guys reconcile that?
Yeah. I mean, we've had that happen, and Yeah, a lot of it's like Bob said, you just kind of learn to let go. I never want somebody to feel like they have to work with us. Like if you don't want to be here, just go, because the job's too hazardous. Life's too short to go through it that way. So if you got to go, go. I've also learned too that, a lot of people think, oh yeah, it's like, starting a business is great. It's the most overrated thing. I wouldn't wish it on some of my worst enemies sometimes. So like, well, I'm just going to start my own business and just rake in piles of money. It's like, no, you're going to stop being a tree person pretty quickly if you don't run, your business right. So there was that. Plus it gave us places to refer our really bad clients to, which was standard practice. Well, we can't help you. So, maybe we'll just give you this guy's business card because I didn't want to deal with you. So but ultimately what it came down to, jokes aside, was taking an abundance mindset as opposed to a scarcity mindset. That, what other people do with their life and their time is beyond our control. So we're just going to do the best we can with our life and we're going to run a high quality tree company and do the best we can. And if there's 50 of those in our market area, great. And if there's one, that's great too. I can only control what I can control. And I always told people to adopt a mindset. It's like, I've never really worked for anybody. I've worked with a lot of people. I've never wanted to run my own tree company as a business owner, but I've wanted to work with a lot of them, and that's just how I've kind of structured it.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. But I will say this. It is irritating when people come into my territory my previously existing clients, and it isn't even price. It's just that the people just decide they want to change. Or, because it generally isn't because of an issue with me. It isn't the quality of the work. But when I look across the street and I see somebody else, good friends of mine, doing work, I walk on over and say hi. Yeah. Hey, how's it going? You guys need a hand? What are you going to do with the wood? I mean, where are you dumping the chips? And so I'm always entertaining, come on over after work or something. Can I, is there anything you need? Right. You need to go to the grocery store, or, I'm trying to help them out, trying to build good relations. I don't flatten their tires, and I don't, it is warm and welcoming, but I do have to ask sometimes, like, really? You're willing to pay twice as much? That's the client's decision. So whatever.
Well, what's interesting, I think, as long as, how do I put this? If your quality and caliber is up and everyone's doing the best for the trees and the people, I think for me, it gets frustrating when it's obvious that it's just about the price and about the dollar. It's more like, they may as well be selling widgets to whatever. It's not, if you don't have that's where I think it feels a little threatening for me sometimes. But if it's someone doing everything for the right reasons and they're doing the good job and they have the same, and that's pretty evident when you make the effort like you're talking about, just to be friendly. If you're getting friendly back, you're both trying to make a living and you're trying to do the best you can for the trees and the people. That really is, you can't really knock anybody for that, whether they want to start their own business or not. But if it's, I think, that's, I think where it shifts slightly, but it also depends on where people are at in their lives. It makes, we've got 30 plus years of doing this, and, we're not worried about sending the kids to school or starting a family or buying a house, or there's so many things to consider. And I think you always got to keep in mind the other person's moccasins, right? What is going on for them. And that always, I'm trying in my life more and more to keep that as the first thought. What's their view? You look at, my microphone here, like you look at this side of it, but it looks totally different on this side, and you don't, if you don't take the time, you don't see the other side, and you
Absolutely.
Always try to look at things from other people's perspective first before your own is a good practice to keep harmony. And, but it's not easy. Because for me, my ego and my pride, I get threatened, I get afraid. These are all negative emotions that really take me out of trying to build harmony, right? So if I try to look at it first, but it helps anyway.
It's what keeps me going back and volunteering at work days. When we have our training seminars. I just set all that aside and just give everything I have.
Yeah.
In hopes that somebody can go back and, one, operate safely and more efficiently, and can learn something from it. And, that's why I always try to make sure that I have a handout, because it's information overload. Most of the time they're like, oh my God, I don't know how I can keep track of all this. I don't even know how to tie my first knot. It's like, here it is. Take it home. I'm not into the whole publication thing. I'm just into making it available, as a handout, and hopefully it'll change some people. And because there is a lot of time and effort that goes into that work, as you all know.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Take the zip drive. It's like you take the little box. Where's the camera? Yeah. Here, take the zip drive home with you. Oh, I don't have a computer. Well, find somebody that does. If you really want to learn, go plug it in somewhere. Yep. And look at the pictures. Pictures are worth 1,000 words.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And that the willingness to share, I think willingness is a big part of it too. And on that note, thank you for your willingness and your participation today, and sharing freely of your time and your knowledge. And I've really enjoyed our time together here this morning and listening. And I would like to reserve the potential for a video format. We're working on providing some extra stuff for our viewers, our Patreon subscribers. We're thinking Don really would like to do a video thing, and Tony lives not too far away. We'd have to plan yours a little bit differently, but to get some video behind some of this posterity or history of artifacts and equipment, like the first Hobbs loring device, it would be really cool to have that documented somewhere in a video and some conversation. So perhaps one day we can do that.
I'd be more than willing, and thank you for the time. I appreciate it. Tony, great to see you and meet you again.
Yeah, it was great to see you, Bob. Thanks so much for the time. It's a wonderful conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it.